I still remember the night rain drummed softly against my window as I stared at a single unread message. My hands trembled, torn between hope and despair. Loving him had felt like touching the sky. Until the very love that gave me wings left me humiliated, broken, and breathless. You're watching the Untold Love, where stories of hearts and healing come alive. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice keeps us inspired. My name is Emily Carter, and if I close my eyes, I can still feel the weight of that day, the one that changed everything. It was one of those soft, rainy afternoons where the world feels wrapped in quiet. I had ducked into a little bookstore to escape the drizzle, the scent of old paper and freshly brewed coffee wrapping around me like a gentle hug. That's when I saw him, Ryan Matthews. He was standing in the corner aisle, head tilted as he studied the spine of a novel, unaware that someone was watching him with a kind of quiet fascination. I don't know what it was about him. Maybe it was the calmness in the way he moved, or the way his eyes flickered with curiosity as if he was searching for something more than just words on a page. Whatever it was, it drew me in. I wasn't the kind of person who believed in moments, not really, but something about that one felt different, as if time had paused just long enough for me to notice. We ended up reaching for the same book at the same time, our hands brushing lightly. He laughed, a warm, easy laugh, and apologized. I remember smiling back, a little flustered, suddenly aware of how alive I felt. We started talking, at first about books, then about everything else. It was effortless, like slipping into a melody I'd always known but hadn't heard in years. Ryan asked if I wanted to grab coffee, and even though I was usually cautious with strangers, I said yes. Sitting across from him, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd met someone who saw parts of me others often overlooked. He had a way of asking questions that made me want to open up, to share the quiet corners of my thoughts. As days turned into weeks, our connection deepened. We'd meet at that bookstore, wander through city streets, talk until the sun dipped below the skyline. He made me laugh in ways I hadn't in a long time, and every time he looked at me, I felt seen, truly seen. For someone who had spent years building walls around her heart, that kind of openness was terrifying, but it was also intoxicating. Looking back, I realize how quickly I fell, how easily I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had found the kind of love that stayed. At the time, though, all I felt was a rush of hope so bright it drowned out every shadow. I didn't know then how fragile that hope could be, or how much strength it would take to hold on when the first cracks began to show. From that rainy afternoon onward, Ryan became a constant thread woven into the fabric of my days. What began as casual coffee and shared stories quickly blossomed into something richer, a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. We started seeing each other almost every evening, sometimes for dinner, other times just to walk with no destination in mind. With every step, I felt myself leaning closer to a version of happiness I'd once thought was reserved for other people. He had this way of turning the simplest moments into something beautiful. We'd sit on a park bench with paper cups of tea, watching the world pass by, and it felt like we were the only two people alive. Sometimes, he'd surprise me with little notes tucked between the pages of books he knew I loved, tiny fragments of thought scribbled in his messy handwriting. "You make everything lighter," or, "I hope today treats you kindly." They were small gestures. But to me, they felt like proof that I mattered. That someone had chosen to see me and stay. I remember one evening when we stayed out until the city lights blurred into a soft haze. He talked about his dreams, the places he wanted to see, the stories he wanted to write, and as he spoke, his eyes burned with quiet determination. It was impossible not to be drawn in, not to imagine a future where I was standing somewhere in the frame of his plans. For someone who had always tiptoed through life, afraid to want too much, I suddenly found myself craving a forever I couldn't yet name. But along with the sweetness came a whisper of uncertainty. Sometimes Ryan would grow distant for a moment, as if retreating into some private storm. I'd catch him staring at nothing, his face unreadable, and I'd wonder what he wasn't saying. Still, every time doubt crept in, he'd pull me back with a smile or a gentle touch, and I'd convince myself I was overthinking. I fell deeper, despite the flickers of hesitation I sometimes caught in his eyes. Loving him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, thrilling and terrifying, but impossible to step away from. I told myself that love was meant to be a little wild, a little uncertain. And with Ryan, I was willing to risk the fall, because every moment beside him felt worth it, even if I didn't yet understand how much that choice would cost me. It happened so subtly at first that I almost didn't notice. Ryan's warmth, the easy way he'd reach for my hand or lean in to listen, began to flicker like a light fighting against the wind. Texts that once arrived in bursts of excitement now came later, shorter, as if every word cost him something. I told myself he was busy, that life sometimes pulled people in different directions, but deep down, I felt a small, cold weight pressing against my chest. One evening, I waited for him at our usual cafe. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the window as I sipped lukewarm tea and watched the door. Minutes stretched into an hour before Ryan arrived, breathless and apologetic, his smile strained at the edges. He blamed work, and though I nodded, something in his eyes felt far away, like he'd stepped through an invisible door and left part of himself behind. The distance didn't stop there. Calls grew shorter, plans were postponed, and sometimes, when we were together, it felt as if his body was present but his mind was elsewhere. I tried to bridge the gap with patience, with small gestures to remind him of us, but the silence inside him only seemed to grow louder. Then came the night I found the message. He'd left his phone on the table while making tea, and it lit up with a notification. I don't know what made me look, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fear finally demanding proof. The name on the screen was Sophie Green, followed by words that felt too tender, too familiar. I can't stop thinking about last night. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room blurred, and my hands trembled as I placed the phone back where it had been. I told myself there had to be an explanation, something innocent the first couldn't yet see. But beneath that fragile hope was a deeper knowing, one that felt like standing on ice and hearing it crack beneath your feet. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I watched, quietly, over the next few days. I noticed how his face lit up when he read certain texts, how he shielded his phone when I glanced over. Each detail cut a little deeper, yet I clung to the belief that love could weather anything. Still, in the quiet of my room, I couldn't ignore the truth settling like a shadow. The story I thought we were writing together might have lines I hadn't been allowed to read. The night of the gathering is etched into my memory like a scar that refuses to fade. Ryan had invited me to what he called a small get-together at a friend's loft, an evening to unwind, meet a few of his colleagues, and finally see the world he kept separate from us. I spent the afternoon choosing a dress that felt just right, not too loud, not too shy, something that said I belonged beside him. I wanted to believe that this was a step forward, a quiet confirmation that we were moving towards something solid. When I arrived, laughter and music spilled from the open windows. Inside, people mingled with glasses in hand, their voices weaving through the warm glow of string lights. Ryan greeted me with a smile, but there was something rehearsed about it, as though he was wearing it like a mask. He slipped an arm around my waist, introduced me to a few people, and then drifted away into conversations that didn't include me. I tried to stay calm, to enjoy the evening, but the unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks sharpened when I saw her. Sophie Green. She walked in as if the room itself had been waiting for her. She was poised, radiant, her confidence effortless. And the way Ryan's face lit up, brighter, freer than it had been with me all night, made my stomach twist. They spoke with an ease that cut through the noise of the party. I stood nearby, invisible, watching him lean in to hear her, watching her hand brush his arm in a way that felt practiced, familiar. Around us, a few people exchanged glances, their whispers just soft enough to sting. I felt heat rush to my face, the kind of heat that doesn't come from anger alone but from the sharp edge of humiliation. It was as if every tender word Ryan had ever spoken to me had been peeled away in front of strangers, leaving me exposed. I excused myself, slipping onto the balcony, the cool air meeting the tears I hadn't realized were falling. From inside, I could still hear them laughing. A part of me wanted to walk back in, demand answers, reclaim my place. But another part, quieter, steadier, knew that something precious between us had already been broken. Standing there, staring out at the city lights. I felt the painful truth settle in my bones. I had given my heart to someone who hadn't guarded it. And the price of that trust was standing alone, trembling in the dark. I don't remember much about the ride home from that gathering, only the blur of lights sliding across the windshield and the ache that had rooted itself deep inside my chest. By the time I reached my apartment, the quiet felt deafening. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in the dress I had worn, and let everything I'd been holding back crash over me. Humiliation was only part of it. There was grief too, and anger, and an aching question that wouldn't leave me alone. How could someone who once made me feel so safe let me drown in silence? For days, I drifted through my routines like a shadow. I showed up for work, smiled when I had to, but inside I felt hollow. My phone would light up with Ryan's messages, polite, casual, as if nothing had happened, and each time I felt a sharp sting, followed by a heavy wave of exhaustion. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. One evening, after hours of pacing my living room, I finally called him. My voice shook, but I forced myself to stay steady. I asked him if we could meet, that I needed to understand where we stood. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, the same place where we had once laughed over coffee, where our story had begun. When he arrived, there was a moment where I almost lost my resolve. He still looked like the man I had fallen for, tired, maybe, but familiar. But I reminded myself that love without honesty isn't love at all. I took a deep breath and told him I'd seen the message, that I'd watched him with Sophie, that the space between us had become too wide to ignore. Ryan didn't deny it. He looked down at his hands, tracing the rim of his cup. He said he had cared for me, that he still did, but part of him had been tangled in a past he didn't know how to let go of. He hadn't meant to hurt me, he said, he had just been too afraid to choose. Hearing those words hurt more than anger ever could. They confirmed what I had feared, that I had been loving someone who wasn't ready to love me back with the same depth. Sitting there, I felt a strange calm settle over the storm inside me. I realized I couldn't save a relationship built on half-truths. And as painful as it was, I knew I had reached the point where staying would cost me more than letting go. Walking away from Ryan wasn't a single moment. It was a quiet decision that settled in layers, like snow on the edges of my heart. After that conversation in the cafe, I stepped outside and felt the evening air brush against my skin, cool, steady, and strangely clarifying. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own thoughts without the noise of excuses or hope clouding them. I knew I couldn't go back, not to the version of myself who kept waiting for someone to see her worth. The days that followed were heavy, but they also held a strange kind of lightness. I let myself mourn what I had lost, writing pages in my journal about every tender moment, every small betrayal, every lesson tucked between them. At first, the words poured out jagged, full of pain, but slowly they softened, turning into quiet truths I needed to face, that love, real love, shouldn't leave you doubting your own value. I began rebuilding the small rituals that had once made me feel whole. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and stand by the window as the city stretched awake. I went on long walks through the park, letting the rhythm of my steps settle my thoughts. I filled my space with soft music, fresh flowers, and the smell of warm bread from the bakery around the corner. Little by little, I started to see myself as someone worth tending to, someone deserving of kindness, even if that kindness had to come from me first. There were moments when memories of Ryan crept back, uninvited. A song on the radio, a bookstore window, the way rain tapped gently against the glass, all of it could open a door to the past. But instead of letting those memories undo me, I learned to greet them with gentleness. They were pieces of a story, not a sentence I had to carry forever. One morning, as I watched the sun spill through my curtains, I felt a quiet peace settle inside me. It wasn't triumph or revenge or even closure in the way I once imagined. It was acceptance, a soft understanding that my worth wasn't tied to someone else's ability to see it. Choosing myself didn't erase the love I'd felt. It honored the part of me that had been brave enough to feel it deeply. And as I stood there, breathing in the new day, I realized that this quiet strength, was the beginning of everything I'd been searching for all along. Looking back now, I see the whole story stretched out behind me like a long, winding road, every bright beginning, every stumble, every bruise. There was a time when I thought heartbreak would leave me shattered forever, but standing here today, I understand that pain isn't always an ending. Sometimes, it's an invitation to meet yourself in a way you never have before. After I let Ryan go, I didn't wake up suddenly healed. There were mornings when I still reached for my phone out of habit, half expecting a message that would erase the silence between us. There were nights when loneliness pressed against my ribs, whispering that maybe I had made a mistake. But with each breath, each quiet step forward, I began to see that my heart was stronger than I'd given it credit for. Healing wasn't dramatic or loud. It arrived slowly, like dawn seeping through the edges of a heavy sky. I started to notice how the world kept offering small, steady gifts, the kindness of a stranger holding the door. The way laughter spilled easily when I allowed myself to be present with friends. The warmth of a cup of tea on a cool morning. These moments reminded me that beauty doesn't disappear just because love has changed its shape. I still think of Ryan sometimes, but not with the ache that once lived inside me. Now, it's a gentle awareness, a quiet chapter in a much larger book. I can appreciate what we shared without clinging to what was never meant to stay. Loving him, even in the way it ended, taught me to trust my own heart, to listen when it tells me that I deserve more than halfway promises. The greatest lesson wasn't about loss at all. It was about courage. The courage to love fully, even when the risk is real. The courage to walk away when staying would mean losing yourself. And most of all, the courage to believe that there are still pages waiting to be written, full of connections yet to come. As I close this chapter, I feel a calm warmth spreading through me, the kind that whispers of new beginnings. My story isn't over. It's unfolding, richer because of every turn. And if someone out there is standing where I once stood, hurting, doubting, wondering if the light will return, I promise, it does. One tender heartbeat at a time, it does.